back to Field Notes, the infrastructure podcast, where we dig into the backbone of modern connectivity. I'm your host, Abby Crawford, and today I am thrilled to welcome someone who has been a true force in the world of rural broadband and telecom policy, Shirley Bloomfield, the CEO of NTCA. Shirley, thank you so much for joining us today.
Abby, I was so excited to get your invitation and really look forward to comparing notes with you about where we are and where we're going.
So excited. So I just want to start right at the beginning. Let's dive right in. You have had such a dynamic career. So from your time at Verizon and now leading NTCA, what first drew you into telecom and into policy?
So actually, the journey is a little bit longer than even that, Abby, just to share, because you know what? When you've been around as long as I have, there's a lot more steps to it. So I will say that certainly the policy piece came from, I worked up on Capitol Hill, and I spent time, my last role up on Capitol Hill was working for the House Budget Committee. And that is a committee that has jurisdiction over pretty much everything because all of the funding goes through the Budget Committee. And at the time, honestly, I was approached by a woman who was the lobbyist for then the National Telephone Cooperative Association, which was 2 iterations ago of who we are today. She was going on a maternity leave. She said, "Do you want my job?" And I said, "You know what? I know how to dial a telephone. I think I'm the perfect candidate for that job." So I actually, decades ago, came to NTCA to be a lobbyist. And I actually spent 20 years with the association, running their administrative services, FRS, doing all of the advocacy work. Before I had an amazing opportunity to work for Quest, which was then a Bell company, running their Washington, D.C. operation at the time of the 2008 presidential elections. And the reason I took it was not only because the experience was going to be like going to graduate school, but getting paid for it. Seeing what a large carrier was like, given my time with community-based providers, but also because the presidential conventions were being held in 2 Quest cities, Denver and in Minneapolis. And I was given a huge budget to say, do great, fun telecommunications-oriented activities around the convention.
Love that for you.
And it was really, really fun, and I couldn't say no. So I did do Quest for a few years, then Verizon, and then 15 years ago, had the opportunity to come back to NTCA as the CEO. So all of that was an evolution of kind of like being a stone that rolls and gathers moss, and just exposure to policy and the industry and seeing the intersection and seeing how, frankly, really good public policy actually moves innovation forward. It can move deployment forward, and it can certainly, lead to bridging that digital divide for people.
So cool. Well, we appreciate your journey. You have such a cool origin story. And it's clear that your passion has grown and stayed with you throughout all of it, which I love. And you've been such a strong and consistent, by the sounds of things, voice for broadband. And that's no small feat. So go you. What keeps you inspired and energized in this space, especially, like you were saying, as the landscape keeps evolving on us?
Yeah, it's gotten so crowded. It's so interesting to me, Abby, because when we first, broadband rolled out and people were, it was a little bit mysterious. One of the things I found that was really fun is it rolled out even faster in rural markets because the need was so much greater, right? You couldn't go necessarily down the street to a library or get access to medical services. So watching how rural Americans actually how the value of those services and that connectivity almost multiplied was really gratifying. So I will say, in all honesty, what keeps me really inspired are the stories. It's the people. I will periodically, not, my membership are providers, and they're those who support the providers, those in the vendor community who we greatly appreciate the work that you and your folks are doing. But I will also hear from just customers. I will have people who will call and be like, this truck came down the road and they were bringing fiber and I ran out there and said, come to my house, or, something came to my farm, and let me tell you what it's changed in terms of how we do our operation. And honestly, I go out into the field every year. I love to go out and see deployment and talk to community members. And that just, there's nothing more motivating than actually being able to see the fruits of your labor, to say, oh, you know what? It may be a lot of noise in Washington, but it's making a difference. And that's fun to see.
Yeah, I love that. It's worth it.
It is. There are days I have to remind myself, but yes, indeed, it is worth it.
Oh, that's sweet. I just love the idea that you're staying energized because of the people. Like, your mission is the people, and that just really shows. That's so cool. Part of the reason why I wanted you on here, because you have so much passion. I want to shift gears a little bit. So your role at NTCA and your involvement with SERC, it kind of puts you at a cool intersection of telecom and energy. So it's fascinating to me, and I want to know how these two sectors are working together for the future of rural infrastructure. How do you see them working together?
And Abby, can I just tell you, that's such a great question. And I love that you kind of saw this interesting intersection of infrastructure, two really important utilities. What do they do? How do we live without either one, and where they intersect? So you mentioned I'm on the board for SERC, which is the Reliability and Resiliency Council for the power grid in the Southeast. And I also sit on the board for NRTC, which is the National Rural Telecommunications Cooperative, which is an entity comprised of electric utilities and broadband companies thinking through innovative solutions to their business. How do you build smart grid? How do you do sensor and meter reading? And the intersection makes so much sense, right? I mean, I think of the evolution of what you can do in terms of technology for the power side when you think about how do you utilize broadband? How do you actually bring fiber out into the field and use it to gauge what is the power usage? How can we be more efficient? How can we do more remote work? How can we utilize AI? And just to share an example with you of kind of this intersection that I think is really fun, in kind of a fun, weird, policy wonky way, but not fun if you're in the middle of a hurricane. But the chairman of the FCC has invited me to come to do a dialogue with he and some folks in the industry about how broadband providers and the power industry can work together better before, during, and after hurricanes.
Oh, so cool.
Yeah, right. What is that? Like, how are we communicating? How do we help get things back up? Because frankly, so many times the internet is there, but unless you get the power, you can't juice up the internet. How are you communicating when communications are down? How can you do so much interesting work beforehand? How do you collaborate better? So yeah, I'm really looking forward to that discussion because I do feel like I have a foot in both camps. So the ability to see both sides and say, why aren't you talking more? And why aren't you planning together or running tabletops or doing ride-alongs together? So yeah, there's a lot of intersection points.
So cool. It's so interesting to think that while they're so different, these two systems, they can complement each other and they can work together, like you're saying. And especially in the places that matter, in these rural areas or in a place where a hurricane hits, it's crucial. That's so cool. So you're in a perfect spot.
Kind of, sometimes it's good to be lucky.
Yeah, you are. So you have been described in other podcasts that I've watched of you, other speeches that you've given, just on social media. I've seen you be described as a connector and a champion for small providers, which I love. What is your leadership philosophy when it comes to driving real change in the industry? What have you noticed is your best tactic?
So I really, think of myself as a dot connector. I love meeting people and thinking, ooh, Abby, I've just met you, and who you should meet is, kind of thinking through where can you kind of maximize that impact. I tend to kind of think of things as, who can I bring to the table that will give us an even better result? So I am a huge fan of making that table as big as you can get it and getting those different voices and getting people who wouldn't have thought about, how you might partner together or innovate
Yeah.
together or even do a project together at the table. Partially because it's fun to see that finished product.
Yeah.
And sometimes from the outside, it's almost easier to see if you come together and you come together, I think we can do amazing things. It's kind of that whole better together philosophy of, whatever I bring to the table, you, Abby, are going to amplify it. So whatever we come out with is going to be better than anything I would do on my own. And I really do believe in that philosophy.
I love to hear you say that. I'm a firm believer that leadership is just as much listening as it is leading. And it sounds like you have that collaborative listening approach, which is so cool because, of course, the people that are involved, they matter. What they have to say matters.
And the thing that I think is really fun is that, and this is where I think it's also really important at all ages and all stages of people's career. I really find it insulting when people kind of create this like the executive boardroom or the executive table without really pulling up, what is the next generation thinking? I think of it in terms of our industry. And there's so many times I'm thinking, what are the future customers thinking? What are those 16, 17-year-olds thinking? Because to me, that drives, where should companies be planning? Because that is going to be the generation. So yeah, I think everybody has something to give. I don't care where you are on the spectrum or what job title you have. So, and I tend to be really nosy and ask a lot of questions. And I think that's perfect. And so that really helps because I really am naturally curious about what drives people or what drives innovation.
Me too. That literally brings me right into our next question. It's just me being nosy. And I think our listeners are eager to hear your take on this as well. The BEAD program. Very hot topic right now. And I just want to know what your honest take on things are right now with BEAD.
Okay. So here's my honest take. Really wish the last administration had just moved a lot faster. I think they tried to do way, way too much with a program that, frankly, I was so excited about. I mean, honestly, for me, it was an honor of a lifetime to be in the Rose Garden when it was signed into law. I was so excited about the possibilities. The fact that it then just dragged on was really frustrating.
Yeah.
Obviously, there have been some changes. Every administration is going to want to put their touch on it. I continue to be optimistic. I continue to look at the rules and I say, okay, yeah, is there a little bit of a thumb on the scale? Maybe towards satellite, and maybe I'm not sure. I think that's quite as future-proof as it needs to be, a really priority project. But I do believe that it is going to take all tools in the toolkit. I do think that our country's big. It's diverse. They're going to, people are waiting to be connected. Let's go. Let's move. So I remain really optimistic that these state broadband offices have worked their butts off for the last 3-4 years. They are ready to go. Yeah, well, they have to go ahead and take a look and say, is this a priority project? Is this the bargain project? And I think, hopefully, I have great hope that they'll make the best decisions for their states. And I hope that that isn't just what is the lowest price project here, because this money will never come around again. And I would be really sad. And I think it would be, I really suffer for those people who are still waiting for that connectivity. If we really look at the fine, it's the cheapest, it's the fastest, put it in. And then in 5 years, that capacity is just not sufficient. So I do tend to be very fiber bullish. I really do look at my companies and I look at between their OpEx being lower, between their windshield time, maintenance being so much lower, the ability to put it in the ground and keep going. but recognizing again that there may be areas where other technologies come into play. So I know we've got this short window. I am really hoping that states will be compelling enough that the Secretary of Commerce will realize that, we're not getting the short end of the stick out there, that we're really getting that best investment as opposed to really that bargain basement approach. So I'm optimistic. That's
I love that. I think you have to be. I think you have to be with this. But I love what you're saying about, that's something that I feel like if states just go the cheap route, we're going to be right back where we are right now in a short amount of time. So I think that there is so much opportunity, like you're saying, but then there's also just so much complexity in the mix of all of that. But of course, that comes with any opportunity. There's big opportunity. There's usually complexity. So I think being optimistic is the best place that you can be.
And at the time when they were doing BEAD, there was a part of me that said, oh my gosh, you're creating a federal program. You're going to shoot it to the states. States have to come up to the federal. That is so complicated. The real advantage I have seen of this is states do know best. North Dakota knows best. What is still left to be done? What kind of technology do they need? And what kind of areas are yet to be covered? I think the problem continues to be that there are some folks in Washington who think that mapping is done. Mapping is never done. The minute you put a map down, the map is out of date. But I remain optimistic that we're going to, states are going to make those wise decisions, because to your point, this money is never coming back again. We will never get this influx of support for broadband. I'm already finding members of Congress kind of doing a little bit of a walk back in terms of, isn't that good enough? And what I really worry about for rural America is that attitude of just enough is good enough. And I think that will be a real shame. I think people really shortchange what happens in rural America. When I think about our ag economy, I think about our energy economy, our minerals and resources. I think that would be bad for the economy. And I think, as you know, people's demand and consumption we are limitless in our demand for bandwidth. So
I know. So speaking of looking back a little bit, it does not start with BEAD. And what are some of the biggest policy wins that you've seen for rural broadband in the recent years? And then on the flip side of that, also ongoing struggles. Like, what is familiar to you with this situation that has happened before in broadband?
Well, I will just start with what I think has been the biggest win for rural broadband providers, in addition to any of the large providers who serve rural communities, as well as anchor institutions, low-income Americans, schools, libraries, hospitals, was a win at the Supreme Court on Friday that basically established that universal service, the contribution mechanism, is indeed constitutional. Abby, having universal service, getting that ruling from the Supreme Court saying, yes, this program is constitutional, not having that program come to a dead halt, means $8 billion of support annually that goes into building business cases to deploy broadband in rural communities. It makes the networks affordable for those who have access to it. It allows the support to the anchor institutions that are so critical to all of these communities that are served. It's not just my guys that have access to this money. It's wireless providers, it's cable providers, it's electric co-ops. So this is a really, really big win for American consumers, even if they don't realize it.
Yeah, that's huge. Oh, I'm so happy to hear that. I was thinking about you this weekend after our conversation last week.
Yes, super excited. Now, it doesn't mean the work is done. There's still more work to be done to get USF on a firm footing. So I would say that's a huge win, but more work to do. I do look at things like going all the way back to the 96 Telecom Act that actually recognized that You're going to have competition in these markets. What does that look like? How do you take what has been a regulated industry and have them pivot to a competitive market? I've been around long enough that I worked on the 96 Act, and that's really starting to date me. But that was really monumental, right? That whole kind of frame setting for where do we go, as an industry. And then truly working on things like IIJA, the Infrastructure Act, and really having policymakers for the first time in a really comprehensive way, from energy to communications to roads to manufacturing, to be thinking about how do we grow as a country, how do we grow as an economy, and those are some really big and exciting things to be working on. So. But we continue to evolve, and again, there's still work to be done. And, the next frontier, I think there are things like cybersecurity. How do we continue to be thinking about giving providers, consumers, network operators the tools that they need? Data centers, the demand for, the thirst for energy and AI tools and data center deployments. What does that look like? So, it's kind of one of those industries. The fun of it is it always evolves, right? We're never done, Abby. We just keep going.
It is so cool. It's encouraging to hear about the wins, because it is, like you're saying, there's so much opportunity and there's so much evolving and changing. And then it's also grounding to hear that there's still work ahead, and that's okay. And there always will be. But these kind of insights are just super helpful, just to stay focused, stay informed, and just understand that there's always room for improvements, and there's going to be changes. I know we spoke really briefly the other day, the importance of awareness of the industry and what's going on in the industry, and just the storytelling aspect of it, how rural communities are sharing their broadband journeys. You spoke about a tiny bit a few minutes ago, and just the value of local investments. And what do you think is working, and what could be done better to tell the story?
You are singing my song with that. There are times I think maybe my job title instead of CEO should be chief storyteller, because we can throw numbers. You can throw numbers. I can throw, millions of miles of fiber. You can throw out, customer served. It's really when you're able to translate that down to how did it change lives? How did it make a difference? So one of the things we did about a decade ago is we created this Smart Rural Community Program, where we really tried to create a platform for our companies, because one of the things I love about my member companies is they do such cool stuff, but they would be the first to tell you, like, oh, that wasn't really cool. I'm just doing my job. That's what we do. I'm serving my neighbors. I bring innovation because, like, that's what we do. But they don't brag on themselves. They don't tell the story, because they're kind of all like, I'm humble and this is my business. So we created this platform so that our companies celebrate their communities. What did their fiber broadband power in that community that is really worth celebrating, that makes it a smart rural community? What did you do with your local healthcare? What did you do with, your dairy farmers? What did you do in terms of innovating how you're bringing technology to the schools? And so my companies, I've got about 300 of them now across the country that are smart rural community providers, but their communities are smart rural communities. There's highway signs. You are entering a smart rural community. They do ribbon cuttings. We've had FCC chair people out to these towns as we bring the local hospital official in, talking about the 2-bed hospital that is now connected to Vanderbilt Medical Center and is able to treat patients, from far away. And just telling that story gives other people ideas of, I can do that. I can start a business incubation. I can create this new program. So I can create this program for my high school students that connects them with seniors in the community to teach the seniors how to utilize their devices, and all of these things that kind of impact the economy, public services, public safety. So we're all about this story, because you're not going to remember the numbers, but you're going to remember, that cool story of that hospital.
Oh, wow. That is so cool. That is just proof in the pudding. Storytelling is so powerful. I
Right?
love that.
I do
Okay, cool. That is so good to know. I'm about to look that up. I just love that. Okay, so I want to lighten it up for a moment. If you could go back and give your younger self one piece of advice before stepping into this world of telecom and policy, I want to know what it would be.
That is such an insightful question, Abby. I would say it might be almost two things. One might
Okay.
be don't be afraid of what you don't know. And the second one would be just be authentic, just be yourself, because the time and energy we sometimes spend trying to be something we're not is
Yeah.
exhausting.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes if you walk into a position, like I think about walking into telecom, because as I shared with you, I knew how to dial a phone. That was
Yes.
pretty much the extent of my capabilities. I would have overthought it. I would have been like, well, I don't know how networks get built, and I don't know how to splice fiber, and I don't know like what is fiber. And oh my God, you can talk yourself into a frenzy. And I think if you just allow that natural inquisitiveness to just and allow yourself that time to evolve. You give yourself the space to kind of to learn and grow while you're doing it instead of feeling like you have to be perfect from the moment you walked in. So I still struggle a little bit sometimes with having to reprogram my television set, but I don't think that takes away anything from my ability to understand the networks my members build.
Not at all. I love that. It's so grounding to hear what seasoned leaders would tell their younger selves, especially as being someone that's super new to the industry. It just is so encouraging to see like what I could do or where I could be. And that goes for anybody in the industry, like where you could go and what you could be.
So let me ask you. So when you decided to take on this podcast, is there any advice you would have given to yourself before you jumped 2 feet into that?
Um, I have two amazing bosses. Ryan and Brendan are the best. And they gave me this advice, but I'd give it right back to myself. And it was just to be a sponge because there is so much, as we've talked about this whole podcast, that goes into this industry. Like it all ties together. The way that energy and broadband go together. Like I would never have thought. Um, so yeah, just being super open-minded and being a sponge and just listening to what everyone has to say and but also doing my own research. Um, yeah, just being super open-minded for sure.
I love that.
Yeah. So speaking of the past and looking back at what you would have said, I want to look ahead and I want to know what your vision for the next 5 to 10 years is like for rural connectivity and what success looks like for you.
So I think looking ahead, I think we are going to make enormous strides in terms of connecting the unconnected. I think we are going to level set a little bit. I think we're going to get through BEAD. I think we are going to find that we're still going to have a few pockets that are going to be tough.
Mm-hmm.
I think that innovation, I think that some people just don't want to be connected. But I think in general, we will have made strides to ensure that virtually everybody who wants to be connected has that connectivity. I think we're going to go far there. I also think that we're going to get creative in terms of how we educate and how we bring people online. So, when I think about those digital tools and I think about ways we can continue to teach people how we can share, for example, with rural communities to not be afraid of AI technology. What does it mean? How can you utilize it? I think we've got a lot of capabilities there. I think there's a lot we can be doing to educate senior citizens how to get online, how to enjoy it, but also how to stay safe. So I think we're going to make great progress in terms of the deployment. I think we're going to make great strides in terms of the digital inclusion and education. And I think, hopefully all for the good. I also think that, I am seeing some really fun initiatives that I think are going to also take hold as we go forward. And that is harnessing the power of the internet in ways that we haven't thought about. So, for example, one of the things that we've been doing here is we have joined with a group called the Guardian Group and created this Operation iFast, which is internet service providers against sex trafficking.
Oh,
You think of
wow.
so many things the internet does that is good. That most of the sex trafficking crimes that take place over the internet. So how do we as an industry kind of channel what we do for good to combat that? So I've got probably about 400 of our employees of our companies across the country, probably 70 companies at the table who've offered training to their staffs to be the eyes and ears on the ground in these rural communities. Those kinds of initiatives that we're thinking beyond just running a network.
Wow.
I think we're going to see more of that as we continue to harvest the advantages of being a connected world and using that for good. So I think success to me is bridging that digital divide, getting Americans connected, ensuring that no group is left behind, whether you are, Indigenous, Native American, remotely rural, on an island in Alaska. How do we all partake in this digital economy?
Yeah. Oh, it is so exciting to think about what is possible. And I love that you brought up the education standpoint and just having everyone help everyone in different aspects, whether it's, like you were saying, some students teaching seniors how to use technology, or employees being the eyes and ears for something as important as sex trafficking. It is so cool, and there is just so much potential with what you're doing. So kudos. That is so cool. And go ahead.
I was going to say your company helps, you guys also help power this. So you get to take some ownership in this too. I think everybody in this industry should really just take great joy and satisfaction into, again, all of the good things that do come from that, that ability. And I hate to say it, and I know people are we're all over the pandemic, but what a time for realizing how important that connectivity piece is to all of us.
Right.
And just kind of saying, let's not let some of the best parts of that go. We've learned a lot about how to stay connected, how, your folks live in a different part of the country, but you get to see your mom's smiling face when you so choose. And, and how great is that? And, and again, bringing more people into that. How do we make sure that people don't get isolated, or, again, sharing the wealth of what these tools can bring.
It's so cool because I have these same conversations with people every day. We all share that, just the want for everybody to be able to be connected, because we realize how important it is. And so with that, I just want to end with this question. What gives you the most hope right now when it comes to the future of rural America and getting everybody connected?
So what gives me the most hope is I've had the opportunity to live in urban America, obviously in Washington, D.C. now. I grew up in a small town in Wisconsin. I think about what connectivity brings to rural America in so many ways has the opportunity to fuel what I consider a rural renaissance. That ability to bring people back to, if they're interested, in a place that is a little bit smaller, is a little bit more intimate, has a little bit more direct communications with your neighbor, but you can do anything from there with connectivity. You can run a multi-million-dollar business. You can choose to sell your goods on Etsy. You could be a broker or stock trader. You can do so many things, but have the choice of the lifestyle you choose in a community where it might be more attractive for you to raise a family. because you've got the options. And I think that is the beauty of what connectivity does. And so I look at it and I say, if in 20 years from now, I'm reading statistics that says there's been a comeback, a rural renaissance, these small communities where people get together and they light sparklers on a Friday night and, hang out with your neighbors, and can do whatever it is they are gifted in doing from that location, then I think we are well on our way as a country.
That is such an awesome perspective. I would have never thought about it like that, but I love that. Hopefully I can be writing that someday for you to read.
Good. I'm going to look forward to that.
That's the goal. Well, that is such a beautiful note to end on. Before I close us out, is there anything that you want to say to our viewers? Just any final thoughts to leave them with?
Abby, I will just say, we've talked a lot about deploying and we've talked a lot about technology. I would also say, big components of what we're looking at today also really involve the workforce. And so even though it's kind of the human side, and it's really easy, I get really wrapped up in the technology piece of it. I also would encourage all of us to save a little bit of our brain power for thinking about that workforce piece and what do we do and how do we get young people to get engaged in this industry? How do we think about having the right thinkers around the table? How do you get young people excited about being a part of this workforce? Because at the end, and how do we make it easier to be part of the workforce? That may be, dealing with housing issues or daycare issues or all kinds of those issues. But so I'm saying, let's save a little bit of that bandwidth for thinking about what it is we can do to ensure that as this industry grows and moves forward, that we have the workforce to take us there.
Absolutely, because that is the future.
I completely agree. It won't be me, but it's going to be somebody.
Yeah, we need somebody. Wow, I love that. That's so cool. Shirley, thank you so much. This has been such a thoughtful and energizing conversation. I know our viewers are walking away with a deeper appreciation for all the work being done and that you have done to connect rural America. So thank you. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in to Field Notes, the Infrastructure Podcast. Be sure to subscribe, leave us a review, and stay connected as we continue to explore the systems that power our digital world. Until next time, I'm Abby Crawford. That's it from the field. Stay grounded.